Hello and welcome to another installment of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Melissa Howes-Whitecross, and tonight we will be showcasing the power of partnerships in conservation by highlighting some of the innovative and collaborative work that Wilderness Foundation Africa, Conservation Outcomes, Eskom, and BirdLife South Africa have been involved in over the past few years to protect our highly threatened grasslands, forests, and wetlands of KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Free State. I'd like to welcome two of our newest Conservation League donors who signed up last week and now stand a chance to win a brand new pair of Zeiss binoculars. Welcome Chris Adams and Paul Horn, and thank you for supporting BirdLife South Africa. If any of you are interested in signing up as a Conservation League donor, please visit our website, www.birdlife.org.za, and go to the membership tab. A big thank you to all of you who have generously contributed to the production of our webinars, and you've done so using the Quicket QR code or the website donations tab, which you can see on your screen. Every single donation, no matter how big or small, is allowing us to cover the costs of producing these webinars each week, and we really do appreciate your support. For those of you joining us for the first time, Zoom allows you to communicate with us through the chat room and the Q&A boxes. If you just wave your mouse around your Zoom screen, you'll be able to see the little icons for the Q&A box and the chat box. You can type your questions during the webinar into the Q&A box, and we will put these to the speakers at the end of the webinar. Please also remember that as the audience, you can upvote the questions that you would like answered the most. I'd also like to remind everyone that there will be a quick survey when you exit the webinar, and we do appreciate all of your feedback. Now, please don't forget that we have a Jacana Media monthly giveaway competition running, where you could stand a chance to win a monthly book giveaway of the titles that you can see on the screen. And these really are some incredible natural history titles. To enter, hop on over to our Conservation Conversations website and click the link under the competitions section. Now, tonight, I'd like to welcome three very talented speakers who are carrying out extremely important conservation work across South Africa. Ellané van Wyk is a niche tax specialist and is the Environmental Tax Services Lead for Wilderness Foundation Africa's Innovative Finance Program. Kishaylin Chetty is a Senior Environmental Advisor for Eskom's Group Risk and Sustainability Division, and Steve McKean is a Director at Conservation Outcomes and has been instrumental in securing remnant sites of Mistbelt forest and grassland in KwaZulu-Natal, and using the conservation mechanism of biodiversity stewardship to do this. All three of my colleagues are extremely passionate individuals and world-class conservationists in their own right. Together, Ellané, Kishaylin, and Steve are driving sustainable conservation that benefits both nature and people in partnership with BirdLife South Africa. I'd like to welcome all three of you to Conservation Conversations, and while you briefly all greet everybody, I'm going to load up your webinar.
Good night, everyone. It feels like I'm standing in front of an honors tax lecture because there's like 285 people listening in. That's so exciting. It's very good to be here tonight.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Ellané.
Steve, yeah, and yes, it is very good to be here tonight, and I look forward to this talk and to engaging in some questions afterwards. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. And just as Steve said, I also look forward to the talk. It's an exciting topic. It's a new topic for South Africa, and we're really excited about showcasing some of the work that we're trying to drive in conservation right now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. Here we go, and we'll chat to you after this webinar.
I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's webinar, which will showcase how innovation in tax legislation and collaboration between different institutions contribute to the protection of birds and their habitat. But before we start, let me tell you a little bit more about myself and briefly introduce my fellow presenters for tonight. My name is Ellané van Wyk, and Section 37D of South Africa's Income Tax Act brought me here tonight. I was a tax lecturer at Stellenbosch University for 20 years, where my research focus was on biodiversity tax incentives and other conservation finance mechanisms. Through this, I engaged with my now colleague, Candice Stevens, who was at BirdLife South Africa at the time. This connection enabled me to be contracted to BirdLife South Africa during 2019, where we worked on the Fiscal Benefits Project, eventually run in collaboration with Wilderness Foundation Africa. Candice and I now work for Wilderness Foundation Africa, where she heads up Innovative Finance, and I am the lead for Environmental Tax Services. Wilderness Foundation Africa works in collaboration with various other conservation organizations in the protection of important bird habitat, and through Innovative Finance's Environmental Tax Services contributes to the financial resilience of South Africa's protected area network. During this edition of Conservation Conversations, I will be joined by Kishaylin Chetty of Eskom to chat more about Eskom's role in conservation, especially the Ingula Nature Reserve. Welcome to tonight's webinar, Kish.
Hi, Ellané. Good evening, everyone, and I look forward to telling you a lot more about Eskom's conservation work tonight.
I will also be joined by Steve McKean of Conservation Outcomes to chat more about their work in the Mistbelt grassland and Mistbelt forest habitats of KwaZulu-Natal. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Ellané, and good evening, everybody. Yeah, and I look forward to telling you a little bit about the work we're doing in the Mistbelt and the importance, particularly of the grasslands and why we're doing what we do.
Before we start, let's look at a brief background on BirdLife South Africa, which provides this exciting platform of conservation conversations. BirdLife South Africa strives to conserve birds, their habitat and biodiversity through scientifically based programs, through supporting the sustainable and equitable use of natural resources, and by encouraging people to enjoy nature and value it. BirdLife South Africa works with key local partners, with this webinar focusing on the partnership with Eskom on the Ingula Pumped Storage Scheme in the high-altitude grassland biome, and with conservation outcomes on the Mistbelt grassland and Mistbelt forest habitats. More detail will also be discussed regarding an effective conservation finance tool found in South Africa's Income Tax Act and applied to these protected areas. This tax benefit is rolled out to qualifying landowners through the work of Wilderness Foundation Africa. Established in 1972, Wilderness Foundation Africa is a South African project-based, non-profit and public benefit conservation organisation. The foundation works in three key focus areas, namely species, spaces and people. The foundation attempts to maintain its vision of a world that has sufficient intact natural ecosystems and wilderness areas that are valued and effectively protected. Part of the offering of Wilderness Foundation Africa is Innovative Finance, headed up by Candice Stevens, a biodiversity finance expert and niche tax specialist who works in creating finance solutions for landscape conservation. I head up Environmental Tax Services with Innovative Finance, where we provide assistance to landowners of nature reserves and national parks to access South Africa's first effective biodiversity tax incentive, Section 37D of the Income Tax Act. We are currently assisting Eskom's Ingula Nature Reserve to access Section 37D. And to chat more about Eskom and Ingula, here is Kish again from Eskom.
Hi, good evening everyone again, and thank you, Ellané, for that introduction. My name is Kishaylin Chetty, and I am a Senior Advisor in Eskom's Biodiversity Centre of Excellence. An aspect of my role involves the good fortune of managing conservation partnerships that Eskom have, such as the Ingula Partnership, a partnership between Eskom, BirdLife South Africa, and the Midlands Wetland Trust, and the Eskom Endangered Wildlife Trust Strategic Partnership. A question I often get asked is, why does Eskom have a relationship with biodiversity and conservation? Simply put, Eskom as a power utility has a mandate to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity. In the course of those activities, Eskom has an impact on biodiversity and a responsibility to avoid, minimize, rehabilitate, or offset that impact. Biodiversity and conservation is mainstreamed into the Eskom business and forms a part of our corporate plan. My job is effectively to provide strategic and operational guidance to my colleagues on minimizing the impact that we have, and where possible, enhancing biodiversity and conservation in line with South Africa's conservation plans.
Well, Kish, so it looks like Ingula's pumped storage scheme is located in the most beautiful part of the country. It's located in the Drakensberg escarpment in both Free State and KwaZulu-Natal, and was constructed in 2005 as a power station to meet peak energy demand. it is very exciting that the Ingula Pumped Storage Scheme and its associated land have been formally declared as a nature reserve in 2018. The Ingula Nature Reserve is Eskom's third formal protected area, following the Kuberg Nature Reserve and the Miyuba Nature Reserve, all declared in terms of the National Environmental Management Protected Areas Act 57 of 2003, or in short, NEMPA. Kish, tell us more about Ingula and its conservation value.
It is a wonderful opportunity for me to discuss one of Eskom's flagship conservation sites, the Ingula Nature Reserve. The declaration of the Ingula Nature Reserve largely came about following discussions within the Ingula Partnership that led to the long-term conservation strategy for the region. Ultimately, it was a no-brainer for Eskom, whereby managing the sites effectively for conservation would invariably increase the ability of the pumped storage scheme to generate more efficient electricity. The Ingula Nature Reserve was declared to protect 7,200 hectares of some incredibly important habitats, which include high-altitude grasslands, wetlands, and escarpment forest. The property also sits on the continental watershed, with the upper Vulga catchment draining into the Atlantic Ocean and the lower Tugela catchment draining into the Indian Ocean. Thus, the Ingula Nature Reserve is critical for its contribution of significant ecosystem services to communities. In addition to the conservation of important habitats, the Ingula Nature Reserve provides a refuge to a number of species. If you like birding, this is a site to visit. The area has 341 bird species recorded, most notably the white-winged flufftail, wattle crane, secretary bird, the Eurasian bittern, Rudd's lark, southern bald ibis, and bearded vulture. There is also an abundance of other wildlife, including the oribi, mountain reedbuck, and serval, surrounded by unbelievable flora, making the site an incredibly vital biodiversity link for conservation in the region. The site is also currently in the process of being declared under the Ramsar Convention, adding value to South Africa's international conservation goals.
So Kish, for all these wonderful conservation efforts and contributions, Eskom is now going to be rewarded in the form of a Section 37D deduction. Thank you, Kish, for being part of this conservation conversation. As promised, Steve McKean of Conservation Outcomes will join us now to tell us more about their work in the Mistbelt grassland and Mistbelt forest habitats in KZN. Why is that? Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Ellané, and thank you for that intro, and good evening again, everybody. Grasslands are critical components of our ecological infrastructure. We all know about built infrastructure and social infrastructure, but very few people remember that we basically depend on ecological infrastructure, which is basically what nature provides to humanity. Amongst many other functions, grasslands store carbon, they regulate water flows, and together with wetlands, they pretty much act like a sponge to effect the slow release of clean water into catchments on which we all rely. And the wetlands at the top of Ingula are a key example of this. Mistbelt grasslands are second only to fynbos in their diversity of species in Mistbelt grasslands in KZN. And we are losing our natural grasslands to land modification for agriculture, mining, development, and all these other things at more than 6% every year. And added to that, only 2% of grassland in South Africa is actually formally conserved in state protected areas. The other bit of work we're doing is on blue swallow. The blue swallow is actually a flagship species for the Mistbelt grassland. And there are less than 30 breeding pairs of this little bird left in this country. So what are we doing about this? So let me begin by introducing myself properly. My name is Steve McKean. I was a conservation ecologist with the Natal Parks Board and later as Mvelo for KZN Wildlife for over 26 years. My focus was on sustainable natural resource use, resource economics, and developing mechanisms for conservation to be a viable land use for landowners and communities. I was a part of a team of people who developed and implemented the biodiversity stewardship program in KZN in 2005 and 6. Then in 2015, two friends and colleagues and I formed a small NGO called Conservation Outcomes, where I am now a co-director. And what I do is I'm implementing stewardship projects in KZN at the moment. We have formed a very productive and successful partnership with BirdLife South Africa in KZN. And this partnership is set up to support private and communal landholders to conserve and manage areas which are essential for bird conservation. We're initially focusing on the critically endangered blue swallow, as I alluded to earlier, the endangered Cape parrot, and their threatened Mistbelt grassland and forest habitats. Conservation Outcomes is a relatively young conservation NGO. We've just celebrated our 5th birthday, and we've had 5 successful years. We've achieved quite a lot in those 5 years. As I said, we're a non-profit organization created to provide support to land that is being developed and managed for biodiversity conservation outside of traditional state protected areas. The focus of our organization is on securing what remains of our biodiversity, the ecological integrity of our natural areas, and the resilience those contribute also to change, while also contributing to poverty alleviation, very importantly, and meaningful socio-economic development in rural Southern Africa through development of the conservation and wildlife sector. Our philosophy is based on the premise that conservation as a land use can compete highly effectively with other forms of land use, including agriculture, particularly in many of the historically poor rural areas of this country. Conservation can provide meaningful economic development and employment opportunities for people through activities like ecological restoration, tourism, hunting, venison production, to name just a few examples. We have managed to get a couple of nature reserves declared in the Mistbelt since we formed our partnership, and let me describe the first of these. This is Truwergie Nature Reserve. It was declared in December 2019. It is about 680 hectares in extent. It is just southwest of Pietermaritzburg near the Burn Valley. And it has some of the last really good remnants of primary Mistbelt grassland and forest left in southern KZN. It provides habitat for at least 3 pairs of blue swallows, which have successfully bred there for many years. It also provides habitat for several rare and threatened species, including the critically endangered and vulnerable species like Cape parrots, manga monkey, southern ground hornbill, and there are a number of endemics that occur there as well. The other nature reserve we managed to get declared in 2019 was a place called Tilly-Tudlem, which is a beautiful piece, 1,500 hectares of unspoiled grassland forest, and it also hosts a major tributary of the Umkomaas River. It is in fact the source of this tributary to the Umkomaas River, which is obviously a significant water source for KwaZulu-Natal. It has an immensely high diversity of important endemic and endangered grassland associated animals. It has all 3 crane species, southern ground hornbill, there's Oribi, Midlands dwarf chameleon, to name just a few. It's a paradise for birders. It also forms an important stepping stone between other important nature reserves in the area, and the possibility does exist to link Tilly-Tudlem Nature Reserve with reserves like Mpentle, which is KZN Wildlife managed, and is a stronghold for blue swallows, and to try and through that to consolidate important habitat for species for the blue swallow. Tilly-Tudlem is also an important bird area, and it's therefore recognized internationally for its importance as a site for bird conservation.
So wow, Steve, it sounds like conservation...
About 1,500 hectares, it's great.
Sorry, Steve, it sounds like Conservation Outcomes is doing pretty amazing job in the KZN Midlands. And these nature reserves that you talked about, Tilly-Tudlem and Truwergie, also now qualify to access Section 37D, which is very exciting. So we've been talking about Section 37D a lot, and let me tell you a bit more of that. So Section 37D was introduced into the Act in 2015, effective from 1 March 2015. The application of the section was tested at various nature reserves across South Africa during 2016 to 2018 by Candace Stevens, the innovator of this unique tax benefit. It was found to be an effective conservation finance tool. 2019 saw the mainstreaming of the deduction across South Africa through the Fiscal Benefits Project, and assistance is now provided in accessing the tax deduction by Wilderness Foundation Africa's Environmental Tax Services. So why do we say that Section 37D is effective? It provides a real and tangible benefit to qualifying landowners through a decrease in taxable income, and as such a decrease in tax payable and an increase in cash flow. This releases more funds to be spent on the ongoing maintenance and conservation of the nature reserve and on more crucial and necessary expenditure. More funds also mean some nature reserves can provide employment to more people, aiding in alleviating poverty endured in so many areas in South Africa. So Section 37D broadly provides a deduction of the value of land declared as a nature reserve or national park on communal or private land. It's a world first where the value of land is allowed as a tax deduction. Certain requirements of both NEMPA and the Income Tax Act need to be met. And as is always the case with tax, the devil is in the details. So we have to look at each individual case to determine the Section 37D deduction applicable. We can attest to several nature reserves having already accessed Section 37D, and some of which are situated in the grasslands, Mistbelt grassland and Mistbelt forest habitats. There are also other habitats and biomes which have benefited from the tax deduction. And having processed several landowner tax returns with Section 37D during 2019, we have received quite a few testimonials from landowners who see the benefit it provides. One is a landowner of a nature reserve in the Western Cape who attests to the tax benefit enabling them to host long-planned camps to underprivileged children, providing these children with a once-in-a-lifetime experience in nature. This nature reserve is situated in the succulent Karoo biome, which is a global biodiversity hotspot. Another nature reserve attests to this benefit to them. It's a large private game reserve in KwaZulu's Zululand region. They say the tax incentive will release funds which will enable us to employ more currently unemployed people to further improve our environment for the benefit of all species, which will result in a greater game viewing experience for all our lodge guests. This in turn will lead to a busier lodge and even further employment opportunities for the rural communities in our area. The tax saving is significant, and if there is a single motivation for investors in the wildlife economy to join the program, this is it. So why do we even need Section 37D? Now, conservation finance needs to be reinvented to become efficient and to be effective and sustainable. South Africa's biodiversity finance gap is currently at 64%, which means we have a long way to go in effectively financing conservation efforts. Innovative finance mechanisms provide the means of bridging that gap. Section 37D provides financial sustainability and resilience to protected areas, which in times as the current COVID-19 crisis are under enormous pressure, being primarily reliant on tourism. Section 37D is available for set-off against taxable income or could create and increase an assessed loss, which is a tax loss, irrespective of tourism traffic and its related goods and services. The section also provides a long-term finance solution, being deductible over 25 years. It is clear that effective conservation of South Africa's protected areas requires the expertise of several role players and disciplines, which is very exciting. Before we take your questions, I want to thank everyone involved in tonight's webinar, and I would also like to give some contact details for everyone involved in this discussion. So thanks to BirdLife South Africa, and especially Melissa Whitecross, for providing this amazing platform. I want to thank Eskom and especially Kishaylin Chetty for joining in the conversation and in the critical conservation work done in the grasslands and other areas. Thanks to Steve McKean and Conservation Outcomes for joining in the chat and for their invaluable conservation work, especially in the KwaZulu Mistbelt forest and Mistbelt grassland areas. And finally, thank you to Wilderness Foundation Africa for providing the platform to enable us to take the Section 37D conservation finance mechanism and other biodiversity finance mechanisms to deserving communal and private landowners. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ellané. It was good to be part of this webinar.
Thanks very much. It's been great being part of this webinar.
So before we take your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box on your screens, here are some contact details of the different institutions and people involved in tonight's webinar. We've got the Wilderness Foundation Africa, BirdLife South Africa, Eskom with Kishaylin Chetty's details there, and then Conservation Outcomes with Steve's email address there. I want to thank you again for joining us in tonight's webinar, and you are welcome now to post your questions, and we are eagerly awaiting them.
Thank you so much for that, Ellané, Kish and Steve. What a fantastic webinar that was, and really just showcasing when we partner together how much we can achieve. So a big, big thank you to the three of you for joining me this evening. And I think everybody can see just how passionate and skilled you all are in doing what you do. So thank you for being custodians of our amazing grasslands and for incorporating conservation into the work that you guys do. Now, before we move on to questions, please remember everyone that as you exit, you'll be directed to a short 3-minute survey. And don't forget that you can also enter our Jacana Media monthly giveaway competition, as well as the BirdLife South Africa Jackpot Birding competition, where you could win R100,000 cash prize. And of course, our Conservation League donor competition, which you can see on the screen now. Please remember that you can type your questions into the Q&A box, and please feel free to upvote any of the questions that you'd really like to see answered. Now, before we take your questions, just a reminder that next week's webinar is going to be something a little bit different to what we've done in the past. In honor of Youth Day on 16 June, we will be hosting a panel of BirdLife South Africa's conservation staff who will be sharing their journeys into the world of conservation with us. The panel will be open for live questions, and we encourage all young budding or young at heart naturalists who are considering a potential career in environmental science or conservation to tune in. You can submit your questions ahead of time to conversations@birdlife.org.za or type them in the Q&A box during the live webinar itself. And all participants that are viewing the webinar stand a chance to win the Jacana Media Conservation Kickstarter Pack. So please be sure to also enter that competition if you're going to be tuning in. We'll announce the winner of that at the end of next week's webinar. All right, let's tackle some of those burning questions. Kish, Ellané, and Steve, are you guys all with me?
Still with you?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. All right, first question coming up is from Penny Abbott, and this one is for Ellané. Penny's asking, how do you calculate the biodiversity finance gap?
So the biodiversity finance gap is basically the difference between what is required to implement biodiversity conservation and the finance that is actually available for that. So for each country, nowadays, they do that calculation. It's a complex calculation, but it's basically the difference between the finance needs for protected areas and the finance available for it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellané. Steve, this one's for you. Rose is asking, do you have any plans to expand conservation outcomes activities into other provinces? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, thanks, Melanie, and thank you, Rose, for your question. Yes, we certainly do, Rose. We are already very active in other provinces. We are active in the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, where we have a really nice project with the wind farms down in the Jeffreys Bay, Cape St. Francis area, called the Kromme Stewardship Project. It's been going for a couple of years now, and it's leaving a really good legacy of protected areas, working with the wind farms down there. And then we're also very active up in Limpopo and in Mpumalanga, where a lot of work is being done on the private nature reserves out just bordering Kruger National Park, and declaring them and writing post-declaration support to those reserves as well. And yeah, those are and then we have a really nice project. Well, it's not outside of KZN, it's inside KZN, but a place called Babanango, which is also going really well as well. So if you have a look at our website, it'll give you a lot more detail than I can give here right now. But yes, we certainly are very, very active outside of KZN.
Thank you, Steve. It really is amazing to see just how quickly in your 5-year, 10 years conservation outcomes, you guys have been able to really take over all over South Africa. So well done to the team there, and keep up the great work. Now, this next one is for Kish, and it's from Anonymous. But Kish, Anonymous is asking, how does Eskom mitigate the effects of the power stations in the declared nature reserves?
Thanks, Melissa. Thank you. That is a very good question. I think to answer it, one must say that we don't manage the nature reserve as a separate entity to the power station. So these are 3 different power stations where we have nature reserves, 3 different processes. One's nuclear, one's coal, and one's a pump storage scheme. The stations, in terms of their energy production and the way we manage the nature reserve, everything is integrated. It's an integrated management approach, and it ensures that we are able to produce energy while still adhering to the requirements in terms of the Protected Areas Act. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Kish. Okay, Ellané, this one's for you. Once again, Penny is asking, who would apply for the deduction on behalf of community land?
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, Penny. So mostly we find with communal land that there's an organization that's most likely involved, like conservation outcomes, or a safari company, or a wildlife economy company, who tap into the community and assist them with various support in various areas. And then they will put us into contact with the community, provide us with all the information in assisting the community to access Section 37D. So we are aware of, I think, nearly all the communal sites in South Africa, or the ones that are in the process of being declared. And we have plans to also approach them and provide assistance to them. But there are challenges around communities sometimes, you know, with it's normally a communal trust that's being set up. So the trust stuff needs to be in order for us to be able to provide the tax benefit. But we normally know who the communities are.
Thanks, Ellané. And a follow-up to that is from Eleanor Mary. And she's asking, is the tax incentive based solely on the value of the land in question, or are there other requirements that come into play that are needed from the landowner in order to qualify for Section 37D?
That's why I said broadly based on the value of land, because when people hear value of land, they pick up and they think, oh, market value is huge. So no, we do take different things into account. We look at, firstly, the cost of acquisition of the land and any capital improvements. Then we look at municipal value, if it's available, and we also look at market value. And from that, we do a tax opinion and a calculation for the landowner to submit to SARS for deduction. So there's a bit of detail required, which will basically, from the tax side, be the financial statements, you know, the historical cost, then the market value and municipal value, and then from the side of NEMPA, the National Environmental Management Act, there are quite a few documents required from that side, the declaration agreement, etc. So there's about between 6 and 10 items that we have to have on hand when we do submission to SARS.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ellané. Now, Steve, this one's for you, and I know several birders have their ears have pricked up when you were describing those amazing new nature reserves that have been declared. Elton is asking, when can we find further information to visit the Traworgi, Tilly-Tudlem and Ingula nature reserves? And is the public able to access these newly declared nature reserves? So I think, Steve, if you can speak to Traworgi and Tilly-Tudlem, and then I'll let Kish speak about Ingula after that.
Sure, thanks, Melissa. Okay, so Tilly-Tudlem and Traworgi are a little bit different, and I'll start with Tilly-Tudlem. Tilly-Tudlem is in fact a functioning tourism venue. So yes, it's definitely open to the public. They have 2 fantastic lodges there. One sleeping, I sound like I'm advertising for them, but I'm just in the place anyway. One sleeps 10 and the other one sleeps 8. And they have a website, so they'll have all the details on that website about pricing and what have you. But yes, so Tilly-Tudlem is definitely open to the public. They welcome it. They, in fact, part of their business model depends on it. Traworgi, Traworgi Nature Reserve is the unmodified sections of a working timber farm that have been declared. So they don't have any accommodation or sort of facilities for people to go there. But the landowner, I'm sure, would be amenable to people going in there to walk and enjoy the place as long as he's contacted beforehand and made sure that it's okay with him. But it's not officially a sort of open to the public as a venue as such like Tilly-Tudlem is, if that answers the question.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think that certainly does. And Kish, when you're speaking about Ingula, Barbara's also asking, is there accommodation at Ingula? So will you just expand on that as well, please?
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So there is a lot of information with regards to where Ingula is and what Ingula is all about, quite literally on the internet, and you're welcome to type in information onto Google, or you can actually email me and I can direct you to more specific information on the Eskom website. With regards to accommodation,
there is no accommodation within the actual Ingula Nature Reserve, but surrounding the Ingula Nature Reserve, we have a host of different types of accommodation. And Barbara's welcome to email me directly, and I can just point her in the right direction in terms of accommodation, both in the KZN side and the Free State side. Thanks, Mark.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kishan. I would definitely advocate a visit to Ingula. It is one of my top 5 grassland birding destinations in the country. So please do plan a trip out to Ingula as soon as you can once our lockdown restrictions are lifted. It is a beautiful, beautiful part of the world, and I highly recommend a visit there. Now, Michael Raimondo is asking, Ellané, this one's for you. Are there costs involved for conservation landowners who might be interested in this tax relief option, and what is the best way to go ahead?
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, Michael. So, yeah, there are costs involved. Obviously, we are experts providing a legal tax opinion, which consists of a lot of legalities, legal aspects from the NIMPA side and from the tax side. So there are costs involved, but we provide the service at a very reduced rate compared to, you know, the normal tax opinions that people get from professional companies. So the way to go about is to contact us, and then we can just send you all the information that you need, and yeah, we can see if we can assist you, and if you're interested in getting the assistance from us. And my email address is on this webinar, so you're welcome to contact us.
Thanks, Ellané. And then Dale, following up to that, is asking, is there an estimate of the level of potential funding that could be generated with 37D tax incentives?
Yes, there is an estimate. So at the moment, we're estimating that by 2026, Section 37D will contribute to closing the South African biofin gap by at least 8%. So it's going to contribute a huge portion of closing that 64% biodiversity finance gap. Yeah, it's several billion, which is a very conservative estimate.
Thanks, Ellané. That certainly is a sizable portion there, so keep it up. Steve, I think this one's for you. David is asking, what are the key requirements, and he's saying in a nutshell, the short version, to declare a nature reserve, and where could we read more?
Okay, sure. How do I do a short version? Okay, so firstly, we work through a thing called the stewardship program, which is right through the country now. It started in Western Cape and then in KwaZulu-Natal. And basically, to try and summarize very quickly, it depends on the landowner's willingness. It then depends on a biodiversity assessment of the property, which is done in a sort of objective and as rigorous as we can way to do that. It then gets approved by the Nature Conservation Agency and the provincial review panel as to a category that it then qualifies for. And there are different categories of stewardship, starting from a nature reserve at the top to what we call a biodiversity agreement, which is a couple of layers down. And with higher categories comes obviously more landowner commitment. If you declare a nature reserve, it is quite a big commitment. It's an in perpetuity declaration, but then it does enable you to get the tax deduction and various other incentives as well. And as you move down that network, that step layers of categories, the landowner commitment is less, but so are the incentives. So yeah, so once the category then is approved, we then let you know in writing as to and then ask you what you would like, whether you would like the category approved for or whether you would like another category. And bear in mind with stewardship, if you're approved for, let's say, protected environment, you can't say, no, but I'd like a nature reserve. If it doesn't qualify for a nature reserve, it doesn't qualify. But if you qualify for a nature reserve and you don't really want to get into that kind of commitment, you can move down a category or wherever you'd like to be. And then basically then it's developing a management plan with you as the landowner, developing the declaration and the management authority agreements with you as the landowner, and then taking it through all the red tape and legal processes to get it done. And then a nature reserve declaration is an agreement between you as the landowner and the MEC of the province. And that's, we do all of those things and get that done. And once the MEC has signed that declaration agreement and gazetted it, you're a declared nature reserve and entitled to all the benefits that brings, as well as the commitments that requires as well. There's a lot more to this, but hopefully I answered it as briefly as I can.
Thanks, Steve, definitely. And would you say, Susie's asking, that you find the potential owners of these potential nature reserves are being persuaded by the Section 37D tax benefits, or would they opt for nature reserve status regardless of that incentive?
My two colleagues, Kevin and Greg, might have found otherwise in some cases, but personally, I have yet to come across a landowner that declares a nature reserve because there's a tax incentive involved. Most landowners are conservationists that we deal with are conservationists at heart. They want to do the right thing. They want to look after the natural heritage that they are privileged enough to own and manage into perpetuity. There's some landowners who want to avoid that their properties being changed into something else should they sell it. And in some cases, even they're protecting it from family members who, when they pass on one day, might decide to put a housing estate on it or something like that. It's, but those are rare. But yeah, I certainly have not met a landowner yet that says, okay, I'm going to declare a nature reserve because I'm going to get a tax incentive. It's like a cherry on the top, really, in many cases.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve, sorry. Kish, this next one's for you. And Brashan is asking, for the coal power stations, how do you investigate the effects of the station itself on the surrounding environment? And are there measures of remediation at sites where the coal is dug up?
Okay, thanks, Melissa. In terms of the coal-fired power station, so there are a number of things that we would do from a coal-fired power station perspective in terms of managing the immediate environment and monitoring the immediate environment, and that's within our management plans. Specific examples include biomonitoring of fresh water, erosion monitoring, and fire management on the property. But also what we have done is we've identified what some of our threatened species are on the sites, on certain sites, and we've developed species action plans to manage the site for those particular species. In addition to that, there are a number of other studies that are being done by colleagues within South Africa on understanding the air quality effects from coal-fired power station on plants and vegetation, and also specifically looking at the impacts that coal-fired power stations have on water quality and whether or not that has any implications on wildlife within the area. So those studies are currently being undertaken. Hopefully we'll have a good indication of what those impacts are and what can be done to actually mitigate against that. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Kish. And following up to that one from Michael, he's just asking if you can give some more specifics around what Eskom's doing when it comes specifically to problems with birds. And I suppose you could probably use some of the work being done at Ingula as an example, if you can elaborate on that.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So, Michael, very good question, and quite a tricky question to answer. So Eskom is a very big business, and we've got power lines in terms of our transmission network, 150,000 kilometers of transmission power lines, almost 600,000 kilometers of distribution power lines. And what we're trying to do is trying to prevent electrocutions and collisions of bird species on those power lines. From an electrocution perspective, it's quite simple. It takes retrofitting the structure to a structure that is safe for birds, and birds can't get electrocuted on it. And we're retrofitting structures from the 1970s, and that's still continuing. In terms of collisions, there are a number of collision devices that we can place, bird flight diverters on different power lines, and that definitely assists. With regards to renewables, so Eskom does have a wind farm in the Western Cape that we operate, and the wind farm, as you would have heard from a previous BirdLife talk from Samantha Ralston-Payton, that wind farms in terms of collisions have an impact on birds. The key aspect there is all about siting the power station or siting the wind farm before it's actually constructed, to ensure that it minimizes the impacts on birds. And then with regards to general power stations, those have a significant effect on minimizing habitat, or in fact polluting certain habitats. So a lot of the mitigation that gets put in place with regards to that is around ensuring that we try and maintain as much of an intact habitat as possible for certain bird species, as well as ensuring that we minimize or completely eliminate any pollution to some of these habitats that could affect a number of bird species. And Ingula is a good example of some of the activities that go into enhancing the habitat rather than impacting it negatively. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you, Kish. Appreciate that. Ellané, this one's for you. Philip's asking, does the reserve have to be open to the public to qualify for Section 37D? So could, for example, a share block game reserve be eligible?
That's a good question. So no, a reserve does not have to be open to the public to qualify for Section 37D. We have a lot of nature reserves who are not open to the public. So as we speak, we are busy drafting a legal opinion on specifically share block companies. Because of the additional exemption that they have in the Income Tax Act, we've never submitted a tax return from a share block to SARS. We haven't done that yet. So we are trying to get a non-binding ruling from them regarding this. So we don't have conclusive evidence that it can claim Section 37D, but we are trying to, fight the point with SARS in submitting a non-binding ruling. My view is that there will be a partial deduction. There might be a partial deduction under Section 37D for a share block company, because of the fact that certain income of a share block company is exempt from tax. You can't deduct all your expenses. But if he wants to find out a bit more, he's also welcome to contact me in this regard.
Thank you so much, Ellané. And just a follow-up question from Eleanor Mary for you, Ellané. She's asking, so the land use itself and the value of the biodiversity conserved are not criteria in Section 37D?
So not in the income tax itself, but the income tax actually draws upon NEMPA, the National Environmental Protected Areas Act, which prescribes that only sites with high biodiversity value, the highest level of biodiversity value, which needs the highest level of protection, can be declared as a nature reserve or national park. So intrinsically, in declaring that as a nature reserve or national park, you do value basically the biodiversity that comes with the site, and therefore the deduction of the land value. So I think it's going to be very difficult to calculate biodiversity itself, but because it's the highest level of protection, one would assume that it would be a very high biodiversity value.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ellané. We've got one more question to go, and I think this will be a sort of collaborative answer, so you guys can all jump in. Michael Wright has said, now that the tax incentive is in place and functional in South Africa, are any of you looking to collaborate with our neighboring countries to establish a similar mechanism with them? And if so, what countries are these and what stages are you in with the process?
Can I answer that?
Go for it.
From my side first. Yeah, thanks, Michael. It's very exciting for us to be able to collaborate with so many organizations and bring the tax incentive to the people. So we are looking to collaborate with neighboring countries, and the SADC countries specifically, and we're going to attempt to try and establish a similar mechanism with them in those countries. So at the moment, we're in talks with Eswatini, Swaziland, to train up their conservation staff in innovative finance mechanisms and protected area finance, hopefully to establish something there, and then hopefully the rest will follow. Namibia, Botswana, and all those, Zambia. We're looking forward to that. Yeah, we are looking into that and hope it will happen.
That is very exciting, Ellané. Do you want to jump in, Kish?
Melissa, yeah, just from my side, I have had the opportunity of having these discussions with Ethiopia, Senegal, and Kenya, and more specifically with their power utilities and conservation agencies. And we took them through the example of what we're trying to do in South Africa, and they were really, really excited about this. And they have actually shared it with, particularly in Ethiopia and Kenya, they have shared it with their governments in terms of
working through this process. So I have no doubt that within the next 12 to 24 months, they're certainly going to get some guidance from South Africa in terms of what to do within Africa. And it is a great incentive for industry. It's an incentive to assist in terms of conservation. So it is something that we certainly are looking at from an industry perspective. Thanks.
That's fantastic news. Kish, Steve, I don't know if you have anything to add on that. Do you know if there's any stewardship being done beyond our borders? Are there similar mechanisms in other countries?
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, at the moment, we are not involved outside of South Africa, but that's not to say that we won't be in times going forward. I think the future of conservation does not lie in state protected areas. It's with the private and communal landowners. And no matter what country you're in, I think innovative mechanisms and incentive mechanisms to work with private and communal landowners need to be developed. So I think the opportunities are coming, and they are in many cases there already to get these sorts of innovative programs going in other countries. And to some degree, they already are in place in places like Namibia, where the communal the conservancies and all the rest of it they are very successful, but I'm not sure if they actually sort of entrenched in law that they are conservation areas. They're working because people are benefiting and making a living off of a conservation land use, and we have to do that here too, particularly in communal land in communal areas where people need to improve livelihoods and that kind of thing. So, but yeah. Stewardship as such is not active in our neighbouring states, but that's not to say that in times to come that we won't get there, and we would certainly like to be at the forefront of that and lead initiatives to do that.
Fantastic. All right, guys, that is all the questions that we seem to have received this evening. I'd like to extend my personal thanks to all three of you, Ellané, Kish, and Steve. Thank you so much for giving up your Tuesday night and sharing that fantastic conservation success story with our audience. I hope that everybody is having a good week and that everybody's staying safe. I know that the COVID-19 numbers are looking rather scary and starting to climb, so please do your best to keep safe, keep healthy, and as always, keep your eyes outside and on the skies and keep enjoying those beautiful birds that are all around us. I will see you all next time, same place. Look after yourselves, and we'll chat again in a week. Good night, everybody.